What if the most powerful force behind today's culture wars wasn't ideology, economics, or politics, but demography? What if the fierce debates around immigration, identity, nationalism, and belonging weren't just about policy, but about existential questions tied to who we are, and who we are becoming? In this video, we're diving deep into Whiteshift by Eric Kaufmann, a monumental and controversial book that tackles one of the most sensitive topics in Western society, the transformation of white majorities through immigration and demographic change. Kaufmann argues that much of the current political upheaval, Brexit, Trump, the rise of right-wing populism, is not random. It's a response to a historic shift in the ethnic composition of Western nations. Here's what we'll cover. First, what exactly is Whiteshift, and how does Kaufmann define the concept? Second, we'll explore the 4 phases of this shift and how it plays out politically and culturally. Third, we'll dig into Kaufmann's provocative argument that white identity is not inherently racist and deserves the same recognition that minority identities are often given. Fourth, we'll look at how Kaufmann envisions the long-term future, what he calls Melting Pot 2.0. And finally, we'll examine the major criticisms of the book and ask, does Whiteshift offer solutions, or just a diagnosis? Let's begin. So, what does Kaufmann mean by Whiteshift? The term refers to the long-term transformation of white majorities in Western countries due to non-white immigration and subsequent cultural mixing and intermarriage. Contrary to the alarmist rhetoric of some on the far right, Kaufmann does not believe that white people will disappear or be replaced. Instead, he argues that the idea of whiteness will evolve and expand, just as it has in the past. For example, in 19th-century America, Irish, Italians, and Jews were not considered fully white. Over generations, through intermarriage and cultural assimilation, they were folded into the mainstream definition of whiteness. Kaufmann suggests a similar process is already beginning with mixed-race populations in countries like the US and UK. He predicts that by 2100, most people in the West will be of mixed heritage, but many will still identify as white or part white, culturally aligned with majority traditions. However, Kaufmann warns that before this long-term blending takes place, we are going through a turbulent transitional period. That leads us to his 4-phase model of the demographic shift. The first phase he calls fight or flight. This is the initial reaction of ethnic majorities to the presence of new, unfamiliar groups. People may respond with fear, nostalgia, or even hostility. Others simply retreat, physically moving away from diverse urban centers or mentally disconnecting from public life. The second phase is denial. Kaufmann argues that this is the dominant mode among liberal elites. They refuse to acknowledge that ethnic change might be uncomfortable or threatening for some people. Any expression of discomfort is quickly labeled as racist or xenophobic. This shuts down honest conversation and fuels resentment. The third phase is what he calls the actual Whiteshift, the slow process of assimilation and intermarriage that produces new identities and slowly broadens the idea of who belongs to the majority. This is already happening in countries like Canada, the UK, and the US, especially among younger generations. And the final phase is Melting Pot 2.0. In this future, identity will become more flexible, less polarized. New majorities will emerge, not based on race, but on shared culture and civic values. The national identity may evolve, but it won't disappear. But here's the catch. Kaufmann argues that this long-term vision can only succeed if we allow majority populations, especially white majorities, to express their identity without shame. This is one of the most controversial parts of the book. He argues that in today's climate, white identity is uniquely stigmatized. While ethnic minorities are encouraged to celebrate their culture, heritage, and traditions, any assertion of white identity is often seen as racist or reactionary. This double standard, he says, creates a breeding ground for populism and extremism. Kaufmann does not call for white pride in the way white nationalist groups do. Instead, he proposes what he calls ethno-traditional nationalism. This means allowing majority groups to take pride in their national traditions, language, symbols, holidays, without excluding minorities or treating others as inferior. It's a civic, not racial, form of identity. And he believes it's necessary for social cohesion. Now, some of this may sound familiar. It echoes the backlash we've seen in recent years, the election of Donald Trump, Brexit, the rise of nationalist parties in France, Italy, Sweden, and elsewhere. Kaufmann argues that these aren't just reactions to globalization or economic inequality, but to a deeper anxiety over cultural change and loss of group identity. What makes Whiteshift powerful is that it doesn't demonize these concerns. It tries to understand them. Kaufmann insists that identity politics is not just for minorities. Majority groups also experience identity-based stress, especially when told that their traditions are outdated, oppressive, or destined to vanish. But this is where the book becomes a lightning rod for criticism. Some accuse Kaufmann of giving intellectual cover to white identity politics. Others argue that his predictions are overly deterministic, based on assumptions about birth rates and intermarriage that may not hold up. Critics from the left claim he underestimates the structural inequalities faced by minorities, while critics from the right believe he is too optimistic about assimilation and cultural blending. Kaufmann, for his part, argues that we must strike a balance. Denying that identity matters is unrealistic. But embracing identity doesn't mean reverting to racism or exclusion. The path forward, he says, lies in making space for multiple identities to coexist, national, ethnic, civic, without demanding that one be erased for the other to thrive. He also challenges the idea that the only way to fight racism is to eliminate group identities. Instead, he proposes that the way forward is recognition, acknowledging that all groups, including majorities, have cultural interests and attachments. So what does this mean for the future? Kaufmann believes that we can avoid escalating culture wars if we stop treating identity concerns as taboo. If majority populations are given space to adapt and feel included in the national narrative, they're less likely to turn to reactionary politics. But this requires an honest conversation, one that neither demonizes nor romanticizes demographic change. In short, Whiteshift is not a call to resist change, it's a call to manage it. To recognize that identity matters, that demographic trends are real, and that democracy depends on cultural stability as much as economic growth. It's not an easy book. It's dense, data-heavy, and unafraid to tackle explosive subjects. But whether you agree with Kaufmann or not, Whiteshift forces you to think deeper about the roots of today's political unrest. If you care about the future of Western societies, how they evolve, how they remain cohesive, how they treat their citizens, this is a book you can't afford to ignore. You'll find the link to the book in the description below. If this video made you think, or challenged your assumptions, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. We'll keep exploring complex ideas, books, and debates that shape our world. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.